Hot takes. Everyone has them, especially Souls fans, and it's been a while since I went over some. Last time I asked y'all about your personal Souls hot takes, y'all gave me a bunch of them. Some I kind of agree with and some just outright crazy. But this time I'm going to talk about my personal hot take for each Souls game, including Elden Ring Nightreign. So without wasting any more of your time, let's start with Demon Souls. So for Demon Souls, I don't really have a hot take, mostly because most takes people have for this game are usually agreed on. I could say that I'm not a huge fan of the bosses, and a lot of people would most likely agree. If I said that it's the best Souls game out there, now while that is a hot take, I personally don't agree with it because, again, I don't think it is. Every take about this game is something I either agree with or can't argue against. So yeah, I don't really have anything to say for Demon Souls. But there are a couple of hot takes I have for Dark Souls 1. Like, the movement and overall feeling of the game is definitely better than 2, you can argue with a wall. Blighttown isn't that bad of a level and was only held back due to its poor performance back in the days. You know, stuff like that. But the one I actually have is that the later half of Dark Souls 1 isn't that bad as how people make it out to be. Lost Izalith, for example, sure, the run back to the bed of chaos is like absolutely unforgivable, but the level itself, while not that great, definitely gets way too much shit thrown at it. I like the visuals and how large it is, but still don't get it twisted. It's not that great of a level, but it's just that people make it sound like Satan himself made it. Now, the Tomb of the Giants is genuinely a shitter level, and I can't really, defend that. But I do like how scary and horrifying it feels traveling through here. But Duke's Archives now is an actual decent level. The only bad thing about it is the run back to see the Scaleless, but apart from that, it's literally not too bad. So yeah, the late game levels, sure, they don't have the interconnectivity of the early game and they can be a bit annoying at times to navigate and explore, but I did like the change of scenery. Going from green forestry and undead townships to castles and lava-filled ruins was definitely a needed change in terms of scenery. Thinking of a hot take for Dark Souls 2 is actually harder than I thought. It's almost like every negative thing I have to say about the game is a cold take. I could literally say that Dark Souls 2 is the reason my parents got a divorce, and I know for sure there's gonna be a lot of people defending my take. The first hot take I thought of was Dark Lurker. I know a lot of people glaze him saying that he's one of the best bosses in the game, and I genuinely could not understand why. The fight itself isn't too bad, but it's just mid at best, but the run back is absolutely horrible. But that's not my actual hot take for the game. My hot take for Dark Souls 2 is that I actually loved the change of scenery the game offered compared to Dark Souls 1 and 3. I feel like everything in Dark Souls 1 and especially 3 is dark, grungy, and rotten. And while I do love that aesthetic for those games, playing through Dark Souls 2 and seeing bright sunny areas, beautiful looking caves, and just other great scenic locations was something I always loved, despite not being the biggest fan of the game itself. And dare I say that if Dark Souls 2 had Dark Souls 3's graphics, it would absolutely have the best looking areas in the trilogy. So yeah, while Dark Souls 2 do have some bland looking areas, a lot of them also look really beautiful. Dark Souls 3. Now, I couldn't really think of a hot take for it. I wanted to say that the game being linear is a good thing, and while I still agree with that take, it's becoming more lukewarm than hot as time goes by. I didn't like the early game areas that much, but that's just a cold take at this point. The only hot take I have for Dark Souls 3 has to do with one of its bosses, and that's Sister Frieda. While I do like this fight, I do think she's a bit overrated. The fight itself has what I like, a blade wielding boss that's agile and nimble, a great spectacular cinematic moveset, cool phase transitions, all that stuff. But my main issue with her is how drawn out and long the fight feels, especially due to the second phase. The second phase just felt unnecessary. Now, don't get it twisted, I do think she's a good boss, but I'm just not that big of a fan of her, and I think she's a bit overrated. Next up we have Bloodborne. Now here's a game that I have a decent amount of hot takes for. For this, I'm just going to mention some of the ones I agree with until I reach my own personal hot take. The first hot take I agree with is that Bloodborne is somewhat carried by its DLC. I 100% agree with this. While Bloodborne's main game is fun, you can't deny that the boss lineup was kinda underwhelming. Out of all the bosses, he had like 3 or 4 super memorable and fun ones, while the DLC, all the bosses were just hit after hit. Except for one. The other hot take I had was mostly because of the weapons. While I did like the trick weapon mechanic and system, I felt that most of the weapons in the game, apart from a few, felt and looked a bit boring. And all the ones that I really liked are either super late game or locked behind the DLC, which is also late game. So every time I start a new playthrough, I realize I usually just stick to 1 or 2 weapons. Okay, all that aside, here's my actual Bloodborne red hot take. I would rather a Bloodborne sequel or an actual spiritual successor over a remake or a remaster. A couple months ago, I've played the game on PC through an emulator and it ran buttery smooth. I'm talking about 60 frames per second and all that shit. But apart from that, it's basically just the same game again. But maybe that's my fault for doing countless playthroughs of the game, but that's just it. I'd rather a whole new game than just that. Now the remake would probably look gorgeous, especially if it's made by Bluepoint, but it's not like they're gonna fix or add anything new. It's literally just gonna be the same game but with better graphics. And look, I know some people will love that, and I'm not bashing y'all or anything, but I would prefer a sequel or a spiritual successor. Look, I know a lot of people think that there's no way Bloodborne's story can move on, and I know Miyazaki doesn't like doing sequels, but I do think that it could work. But I'm not gonna go too deep into it because that's a whole video in of itself. And speaking of spiritual successor, I know there's Duskbloods that's gonna come out next year, but I don't really count that. Sure, it has that Bloodborne look to it, but it's a multiplayer game and I want something single player. My previous hot take for Sekiro is that it was the easiest Souls game, once the combat really clicks with you. And while I still think that, I do have a different one now. I think that Sekiro would have been even better with more weapons, and I'm not talking about having hundreds of different ones like Elden Ring. No, I'm mostly just talking about something along the lines of Kazan, where you have 3 or 4 different weapon types. You could have the basic katana, which is the most balanced option, a longsword or a great katana, dual swords, and a polearm for reach. While it would be harder to implement, and it would also be hard to make each of them feel differently while also having to tune them around the bosses, I don't think it's impossible. And I do think that you can still have that fun rhythmic nature with different weapons. I just hope that if Sekiro does get a sequel or hopefully a spiritual successor made by FromSoft, it will have different weapon options. Moving on to Elden Ring, all the hot takes I thought I had for the game turns out to be somewhat cold or lukewarm at best. Most of it has to do with the bosses or level design or the open world. For example, one of the biggest criticisms for the late game in DLC is that the bosses are super fast with little downtime. But I'm pretty sure that's not really a hot take since a lot of people agree. So for an actual hot take, I want to say that the weapon movesets are a bit bland and boring. Sure, you have Ashes of War, but apart from that, every weapon just feels the same. And the moveset is oftentimes just basic. No, I'm not saying I want the Tarnish to move like Virgil or whatever, but at least make the moveset not just feel so, fucking lame. That's why I like the light greatswords from the DLC, because the moveset looks really stylish, but that's just my only hot take I have for the base game of Elden Ring. Now for the DLC itself, a lot of criticisms were made, especially about the bosses, the Shadow Tree fragment system, and the emptiness of the open world. While I do agree with most of the criticisms made about the first two, the one I don't really mind that much is the emptiness of the open world. I felt like the world itself didn't need to be filled to the brim, mostly because I can't really think of what else the devs could do to not make it feel empty. More enemies, mini-bosses, some cool new weapons or items, I don't know, apart from those I can't really think of anything else. Also, the empty feeling never bothered me, especially the abyssal woods. I think the scenery and atmosphere makes up for the levels, so I never felt bored while exploring the land of shadows. And finally, we have Elden Ring Nightreign. My hot take for Nightreign is pretty simple, and I'm not sure if it's even a hot take at this point, but I do think that the game needs more areas. I know it's easier said than done implementing a whole new map into the game, especially since lore-wise Limvale makes a lot of sense, but it does get a bit boring just going through the same area over and over and over again. Sure, there's the shifting world events with new areas popping up in the map, but I want a whole other map itself. Maybe it could be modeled after the Altus region in the base game, or, fuck it, give us a variation of the Shadowlands from the DLC. That's all I want, just more maps. That's it. That's my hot take. So that's pretty much it when it comes down to the hot takes I have for each of the Souls games. If you guys like this video, leave a like and subscribe. And also let me know down in the comments some of your personal hot takes about each of the games. Anyways, I hope you guys have a good one.